The Redstone rocket was brought to Warren, New Hampshire in April 1971, on this day 50 years ago, by New Hampshire native Henry Ted Aslin, who worked at the Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama, and it was commemorated by New Hampshire Governor Walter Peterson and supported by the town government. So this leftover unlaunched Redstone is maintained here by the Warren Historical Society 50 years later, and it was also commemorated by astronaut Alan Shepard, a New Hampshire native as well.
The PGM-11 Redstone stood 21 meters tall, had a 1.8 meter diameter. Fully fueled, it weighed 28 metric tons. Its engine produced 350 kilonewtons of thrust, and it reached a maximum velocity of Mach 5.5.
So, based on the German Aggregat 4 and V2 rockets, the Redstone is powered by a single A7 engine, which runs on liquid oxygen and ethyl alcohol, and it is powered by a hydrogen peroxide driven turbopump. And you can see at the top here, there's those 3 ports, and those are what feed the 3 respective propellants. And you can see there's 4 control surfaces here on the outside for aerodynamic stability, and underneath here there are 4 control vanes which intersect the rocket exhaust, and that was a form of early thrust vectoring on these rockets. So the Redstone here, the main difference between it and the ones used on the Mercury program is basically the tank section was extended for the Mercury Redstones, and obviously the payload and capsule and upper stage segments at the top are varied from the missile variants of the Redstone. But other than that, most of the hardware here is very similar to what was used to launch Alan Shepard.
When the Redstone rockets were decommissioned in the late 1960s, the town of Warren voted in favor of having one brought up from Alabama and placed in the village center park, where it also serves as a monument to Alan Shepard, who sent a signed commemoration message to the monument and the town. It was placed under the control of the town's historical society, whose museum center is located just beside the monument. It stands today as a unique attraction in a small rural town which wanted to honor local pioneers of the space race and the historic piece of hardware that is this vehicle. Designed by the U.S. Army Ballistic Missile Agency, led by Dr. Werner von Braun, based on the German Aggregat 4 V2 rockets, and built under contract by Chrysler Corporation, Redstones were produced and active from 1952 to 1964, launched from Complexes 4 and 5 at Cape Canaveral, but were also in service at White Sands Missile Range, New Mexico, Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and in West Germany during the Cold War. Other derivatives include the Jupiter and Juno rockets, the latter essentially a Jupiter with a spin-stabilized solid-fuel upper stage cluster, which was used to launch the first U.S. satellite, Explorer 1, and other early small spacecraft. A single Jupiter and 8 Redstone rocket cores went on to form the first stage of the Saturn 1 and 1B, which were used in the Apollo program. Modified Redstones were also used as the basis of Sparta rockets, which were launched from the Woomera rocket range in southern Australia in the late 1960s.
The McAuliffe Shepard Discovery Center was founded in 1989 as the Krista McAuliffe Planetarium. It's named after two astronauts from New Hampshire. In 2000, it expanded and became a space museum and memorial to Alan Shepard as well. The Redstone rocket you can see behind me is a mock-up of the Mercury launch vehicle, which carried Shepard's capsule Freedom into space 60 years ago today, on the 5th of May, 1961, which was the United States' first human spaceflight.
This achievement of the early US space program came just 3 weeks after the Soviet Union launched the first human in space, cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin, who completed one orbit on Vostok 1. The 15.5-minute Mercury 3 flight reached an apogee of 187.5 kilometers and traveled about 490 kilometers downrange, where it was recovered by the ship USS Lake Champlain. Redstone was preceded in the Mercury program by Little Joe rockets, which launched boilerplate capsules on short test flights, and succeeded by the Atlas rockets, which launched the orbital Mercury missions. Before Shepard's launch, the chimpanzee Ham was a test passenger on the Mercury 2 mission. Astronaut Gus Grissom launched on Mercury 4, a second crewed suborbital flight 2 months after Shepard, and the chimpanzee Enos on Mercury 5 preceded John Glenn's first U.S. crewed orbital spaceflight, Mercury 6, less than a year later. 3 more Atlas-launched missions carrying astronauts to orbit happened by 1963, and were then succeeded by the twin-seat Gemini capsules. Just 20 days after Shepard's launch, however, President John F. Kennedy announced the intention to send U.S. astronauts to the Moon and return them safely, which would be accomplished within the decade by the Apollo program, including Apollo 14, in which Shepard himself would travel to space again, this time to walk on the Moon. The legacy of Mercury, the first U.S. human spaceflight program, is commemorated here, along with the Space Shuttle program, which is now celebrating its 40th anniversary. With its many science and technology exhibits, frequent astronomy events with the New Hampshire Astronomical Society, the McAuliffe Planetarium, and this Mercury Redstone rocket standing as a proud monument to spaceflight history, the Discovery Center remains a site for education and advocacy of space exploration, aerospace engineering, and astronomy. This commemoration comes as the next chapter of the U.S. space program unfolds. The Commercial Crew program now transporting crews to the ISS, and the Artemis and Orion programs returning humans to the Moon, and then going to Mars and beyond. Anyone residing or traveling in New Hampshire should take time to visit these landmarks and think about the point in history that they represent. We must remember this journey of human space exploration began with missions like Mercury Redstone 60 years ago.